Shalom. Welcome to another service with After's Heart Ministries. Today, I would like to ask you a question about your faith. I'm going to actually attack the very core of what you believe. And the reason I am is threefold. Number one, because you're supposed to be secure in it. And if you're not, then you will know by the end of this video. Second is that it is absolutely necessary that you work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. And third is that nobody else cares what you believe. I know that all three of those are probably pretty shocking to the system, incongruous, uncomfortable. But guess what? Pain is a catalyst for change. And by the end of this video, I promise you, you're going to appreciate those three things. In fact, I may only touch on one or two, depending on how long this takes, but I can tell you that before anything else, it is very, very important that we understand the season that we're in. So let me explain something. When I say the word season, you need to think cycle. When I say the word cycle, you need to think season. What do I mean? Well, let's take a look real quick. Let's jump over the board right away and get right into this. So first and foremost, almost everybody in the world has some form of four seasons. Now, sometimes those four seasons are broken up a little bit different, but technically we usually have a winter time, which we could consider the darkness of the year, right? Then we have spring, which is new growth or the resurrection of the year. And of course, we have the summer, which is the maturity of the year, right? Things are growing, things are producing. And then we have fall, which is the entropy of the year. It is the beginning of the death. Now, what's really interesting is this works for ego, this works for many, 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 many things. But what I want you to see is that no matter how you believe, no matter what you think, a season comes back around. Okay? Now that is very, very, very important because on a few occasions, Yeshua said, if you would have only recognized the season you were in, if you would have only recognized your visitation. So let's talk a minute about visitation, because what's interesting about visitation is in Hebrew thought, because remember last week I taught you that there is an absolute imperative that we drop into ancient Hebrew nomadic thinking, lifestyle, culture, and language if you want to apply the Bible to your life. If you don't, go find another religion, do something else. Because most other religions have adapted to modern life. This one can't. And the reason it can't is because what it's designed to be and do. Okay? So when we are thinking about the premise of a season or a cycle, it is very important that you realize that that is part of this thought process on this lifestyle, on this thinking. Yeshua said, you don't recognize the visitation. What is a visitation? Interestingly enough, a visitation is not when somebody comes to see you, but the actual word in the Hebrew, pachat, means to pay attention. And what's interesting about it is it actually means to observe someone else trying to gain your attention. That's right. So it's not that you're a lay minister and you're going to go visit Grandma Betty, who is the oldest person in the church, and therefore she needs to be visited. Okay? No, that's not what it means. It means to pay attention. So what's interesting is it's saying you did not recognize when I was paying attention to you. So now you will not see me again until you say, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Now, the intrigue here is that will be in a season. But what we need to do is recognize our season. Okay. So there's a number of things that we need to do. The first thing that we need to do is understand that every life of a human, from the beginning of time until the end, where the cycle flips back over one more time, because if you think for a second time is linear, you have absolutely missed the point of God's appointed times. They come around once a year because time comes around at a certain time. And what I mean by that is I don't know if it's a reset. I don't know if we start over. I don't know what it is, but time never, ever stops. It is cyclical. Okay. And interestingly enough, since it's cyclical, it is actually Hertzian. And if it's Hertzian, then it's actually playing some frequency. That's right. The entire span of time from beginning to end. So from Breshit to Sof is all one long frequency. We don't know what frequency it is because we don't know how much it oscillates in the huge sound machine of the universe. But what we do know is that time is cyclical. Okay, so, and if you have any question about that, you need only look at what? Heat and cold, seed time and harvest. I'm sorry, seed time and harvest. Yes, we plant in the fall, we harvest in spring. Okay, so, and what I mean by that is the spiritual mechanism of reality as being a cycle. Okay, the reason why that's important is because when you recognize the season that you are in, you will greatly understand the mechanism of that season and how to use it to your benefit, how to go with the flow, how to ride the wave of it. Okay. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about humility. We've talked a little bit about truthfulness, right? And whatnot. Just let me really quick show you which season we're in and help you understand the mechanism of that season. And then we can jump into those three things that I mentioned, right? Okay. So, and believe you me, like I said, I don't know that we necessarily get to them because there's a lot of foundation we got to build and we got to kind of look at how this is going to go. Okay. So first and foremost, let me jump over to the board and we will do what you know. We will draw our three dots. And I am very, 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 I want this to be so repetitive that 20 years from now, you've still got these three dots in your head, okay? So we'll do Passover. And of course, I'm using English words instead of the Hebrew because I am addressing the church today. And the church does not know the preciousness of the meaning behind the words of the names of the feasts. So we will just go ahead and we will speak churchese for a minute. Christianese, right? And then, of course, we have, and actually this really doesn't look like an O. Okay, and then we have tabernacles, which is one of the most ridiculous words I actually have ever heard of, but whatever. Okay, so now the next thing that we're going to do is just get our timeline in there, right? Our cyclical timeline. Why? Because Passover comes every year, right? Passover comes every year. So this is just part of a cycle. It's part of a circle. But we're not going to draw that circle right now because that would get rather tedious. Okay, so the next thing that needs to happen is we need to illustrate some things that happen. And I love using the color blue for this, for spiritual. And the reason I do is because there's something very calming and pleasant about it. And if that's the very least thing that you experience in this in this ebb and flow, that's pretty sufficient. Okay. And then of course I do have something a little bit more adverse. So we'll go ahead and use red because that's kind of adverse to blue. Okay. And so now what we have going on is we have two different cycles moving independently of each other, but having coincident moments. Okay. Now what we need to do is we need to say, okay, so this is and will always be labeled, and let's go ahead and put it in this dark orange to indicate the dryness of it. Let's do wilderness. And what's important about this, as I'm illustrating this, as you realize that when we're dealing with this, the way that we the way that we understand it will be based upon this ebb and flow. And so the wilderness has a drop in the red, which I'll explain in a minute. And of course, the other season is the golden, right? And we will talk about the golden calf a little bit. We will explain a little bit more about the context behind the golden calf so that you can understand better what's actually needing to happen here. Okay. So the way I want you to envision the wilderness season, and let's see, let's label this in yellow. And so I'm just going to put an arrow here, and I'm going to write this really thick so that you understand what's going on here. Okay. And I am going to write this really thick so that you understand that this is actually about this part here. Okay. So now what I want to do is just really quick get back into that discussion about the ancient Hebrew nomadic lifestyle and what I believe about it. Okay. So I believe that one of the elements of reality is that every single human from the beginning of time to the end of time, as a cyclical process, their lives actually become a spiritual reality. And truth be told, that spiritual reality will become some sort of philosophical element of reality, physical element of reality, and how do I put this? Environmental element of reality. And the reason why I hesitate to say environmental is because I don't want you to think, the birds, the bees, the flowers, and the trees. I want you to think what surrounds you, okay, is your environment. And so an environmental reality can actually be circumstances, it can be people, it can be your circle of influence, it can be people outside of your circle of influence, influencing your circle of influence. Okay. So before we get too much into this, I want to get your mind wrapped around that idea. When you read about Adam in the Bible and all of the stuff pertaining to Adam, for example, what Paul says, if by one man sin entered the world and therefore death, then by one man life entered the world and through what? Grace, right? Through justification, etc., etc. Now, the actionable piece of this is that we can sit down, we can look at a Bible, we can look at the verses and we can read about the person, but what we don't realize is that person was not intended to be Bible. That person was just a precious human being, just like you, who was being watched, and notes were being taken about it. The life of the testimony of their strengths and their power were documented and eventually became our story. Abraham, the father of all who believe. But what you don't understand is that your very life is actually becoming a spiritual reality in the future. and is actually becoming an environment reality in the future, an environmental reality, and is becoming a physical reality in the future. And what I mean by that is that as you live your life, you create branches of reality. Now, there are people who can doubt that or choose not to believe that or have some sort of skepticism about it. And quite frankly, I don't care. And the reason I don't is because I never, ever intended for any of this that I live by to be public. And so for me, this is my reality. This is my walk. And I quite frankly do not care what you think or believe about it. Why do I say that? Because that's the length of security you need to have in what you believe. But I'm going to show you today that there is a map of stuff that you need to work through, okay? So the first thing that we probably need to do is understand what this ebb and flow's purpose is, okay? So on the one side, I want you to see this context. And so I'm going to put a phrase up here. Let's jump to this. I'm going to put a phrase up here, and that phrase is actually going to reflect the season. Oh, how about the fine tip goes orange? I let you go home. Okay. Now, there's some things that I want you to think about as you see that phrase. First of all, who is I? Okay. And second of all, that I says that that's what's being allowed to be happen. Okay. And I'm going to show you the verse. And the reason I'm going to show you the verse is because if there's anything that you need to understand, it's that you need to follow your Messiah to the T. He came to show us a path. And that path is not what Christianity teaches today. It is not what Judaism teaches today. And it is not what the anti-establishment spiritualists teach today. It's actually none of those, but it's a combination of all of those. I will explain. So now the next thing that we need to do as we engage in this interaction is we need to think about Yeshua's time in the wilderness. It's very, very important. Like, I will read this to you and you will understand this so much better if you put it in the context of my teaching about the wilderness season. And when I say my teaching, I'm going to very, very, very cautiously remind you that I don't prepare my messages and that I operate a lot within the intuition and leading of something higher than me to bring these messages. So if I say my teaching, you need to understand, no one else teaches the wilderness season and the golden calf season. The congregation I came out of who discovered it, they're scattered, and I am one of the ones who still teaches it, okay? And what you need to know is that I am one of the ones who actually discovered it through the study and understanding that every life creates a reality, a philosophy, and an environment for the next. Okay, so it's very, very important in all of that process to realize that when Paul says it was written for you, when he was writing to the I believe it was the Colossians, no, it was Corinthians. He was writing to the people in Corinth saying, this was written for you. Corinth was not some special city that gets special treatment. Yahweh, the intensification of all power in the universe stuffed into something you can understand, is equal on all parts in his distribution of information, of provision, and of protection. As a result, it is imperative that you realize that even though the letter was written to the Corinthians, what Paul was saying was actually universal to all humans, regardless of what they believe. Oh, that's a scary one. In other words, what was written in Torah, which was somebody's life, you need to realize there was a person who lived a life, who was called an Israelite, and that Israelite was born, lived, and died, and became a story that you somehow hold in high regard. Later, that's going to be important. Okay, so now here we go. We are going to go to Matthew chapter 4. Matthew chapter 4, okay? And we are looking specifically, starting in verse 1, actually. Then Yeshua was led by the Ruach into the Bamidbar, Bamidbar, into the wilderness, the Midbar, right? To be tempted there by the devil. Okay, now there's a few things that are absolutely imperative here that we need to get our minds wrapped around. First of all, Yeshua. Let's talk a minute about Yeshua. Well, there's a number of things that we definitely need to never forget and definitely establish. Number one, first and foremost, absolutely imperative, simple, probably, I don't know, third year college theological imputation. The simplicity. He made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God. Okay? He made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God. Now, what does that mean to this circumstance? That Yeshua has a very different process than we do. Why? Because whatever it was that we were in our filth of our minds, our wounds, our entitlements, our limiting beliefs, and our lack of imagination, he took upon himself, and we became an enlightened, intuitive, completely empowered being, able to distribute Yahweh's wealth equally. That's what a righteous one is. Somebody who distributes their wealth equally. That's right. It is all about the prosperity, but it is also about the distribution. Okay. So when we think about Yeshua, that's the number one thing that we need to do. The second thing that we need to get our minds wrapped around concerning Yeshua is his name. The word salvation in the Hebrew comes from the root Yeshua. And Yeshua is actually the ancient the ancient nomadic philosophy of deliverance through violence. And what I mean by that is that we don't go and negotiate for a hostage. We send an assassin to eliminate the hostage taker. And that's just how it works. We send somebody in with a dagger to remove the hostage taker. We don't negotiate, okay? That's not what Hebrews do. We don't say, oh, you know what, we'll pay a ransom. No, you go cut the guy's throat, okay? Now, that turns into the shepherd with the what? Rod. Remember, there's a staff and a rod. What's the rod? Well, it's usually a chunk of bone, could be a knee bone from a cow, could be a shoulder bone from a cow, but it is a round piece attached to a piece of wood, and it is designed to crack and break bone. It is designed to crush a skull, okay? And so when we look at the ancient pictographic definition of Yeshua or salvation, it is to violently remove something from danger. Okay? So we're not talking about just protecting. We're not going to step in front of the thing and have a shield. No, we're going to destroy the opponent. We're going to disarm, immobilize, and that immobilization will be permanent. It will be a permanent damage to that enemy that took that sheep. Okay? Now, in the ancient pictographic Hebrew, this is what it says. It says, destroyer watches. Who's the destroyer? The one who is waiting for something to mess with its sheep. Okay? So contextually, what we need to accept is that the word salvation and the word Yeshua as a name means destroyer watches in order to violently destroy the opponent who would harm its sheep. So you could see the zeal, you could see the violence, which is just so scary for Christians and for humans today. Okay? Now, it is very important that you understand that that's an element of Yeshua that you need to understand and pay attention to. Okay, now, point number 3 concerning Yeshua. Point number 3 is that Yeshua was not and is not the same type of soul as you and I. And I'm going to tell you why. Because the actual Word of God became flesh and dwelt among us. Now, I argued last week that Torah is the Word of God, and there is no other Word of God. In fact, when the prophets speak, they don't say they are the Word of God. They say we have violated the Word of God. And as a result, we are now going to answer for having done that. In fact, Ezekiel chapter 22 it communicates that there is a violence towards the Torah. So, Word of God and Torah are synonymous. Prophets and Word of God, not synonymous. Matthew and Word of God, not synonymous. Okay? And the reason why that's important is because of what the Torah was to the people who this Bible was written for. That's right. What I said was the Bible was written for a specific people. You need to decide in your own way whether you are that people or not, because what the church has told you is not right, not true, not accurate, especially when James says something like, hey, here's my letter. It's to the 12 tribes scattered abroad. We don't even know who the 12 tribes are. But I can ask you, what tribe are you? Because you need to be one of the 12 in order for that book to apply to you. You say, oh, I could read it and apply the philosophy. No, you can't, because you do not understand the culture. You do not understand the people. You do not understand the lifestyle. And if you did, then you would not be sitting in a pew on Sunday mornings trying to practice a religion. You would be living out the Bible. Now, one of the primary pieces of information that we need to understand then about Yeshua is that he is not a normal human soul. He is the essence of Yahweh's teaching and instruction. He is the will of God. He is the voice of God. And what you need to grasp is that that means that he had a perfect understanding of Torah, because he was Torah, which means that his walk, his process, his movement through this maze of life was actually about, and this is important, showing us how. Moses said, don't say you can't do it, right? Don't say who will go up and get it for us so that we can understand it. Don't say who will go out and bring it to us, because it is far, because it is near and in your heart and written upon your heart. So circumcise your hearts this day. And I do not write this, or I do not speak this only to those who are present with me today, but to those in the future. That's us. And so when you start to mechanize that truth in your life, you will begin to move in a better direction. Meaning what? We need to follow our Messiah absolutely to the T. That means feast days. That means the words he said. That's what he said about the kingdom of heaven. We need to understand it all, because what he described about God, what he described about the kingdom of heaven, what he described about the life to come, what he described about hell, what he described about Pharisees, what he described about the common people, what he described about the priests. It is absolutely imperative that you understand that could be your only thinking, your only insistence of lifestyle. And I'm gonna prove to you today how important that actually is. Okay, so now the next thing, so we remember I said there were 5. So we have what? We have first the imputation, the action of the light of the Messiah, which is the light of Passover, which altered the face of the universe, altered the reality of everything that existed before and after the moment when it occurred. And we could argue that if that was true, then there was something wrong with the first version of it. But you know what? Let's just go with what we have right now. He made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God. Okay? Second, his name means destroyer watches to violently remove one of his sheep from the mouth of a predator through the crushing of the skull, through the absolute destruction of the body. Okay? 3, he is the soul of Torah, not one of us souls. In other words, Torah, God's teaching and instruction, the words that came out of his mouth that created the universe, the words that came out of his mouth that created social justice, the words that came out of his mouth that created equality, and the words that came out of his mouth that created roles and stewardships, became a living, breathing human being whose mystery is still unknown. What did we get? We got from age 30, and we got a little bit of age 12, and we got day 1. That's it. If you think for a moment that you can, from that, surmise what a life was, you got yourself all messed up. Because truth be told is, none of you can probably remember your birth. And if you can, you're very special. And I would start thinking about what the universe wants from you. But I can tell you this, as you get into the thinking behind that understanding that he's the soul of Torah, things change. So what's the 4th thing? The 4th thing is that he was in all ways tempted and did not sin. Oh my gosh, if you could get your mind wrapped around that, and we will probably bring that up again sometime today. Sin is a transgression of Torah. Of course he did not sin, because why? He was Torah. However, he had to be capable of it as a human, or our salvation is in vain. And what I mean by that is that he had to be tempted, but did not sin. So people go, oh, well, the whole temptation was actually the temptation of the cross. Whether or not he would actually go to it, he begged God to take it away from him, blah, 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 blah. Okay, you know what? There's a reason why you're sitting in the pew on Sunday mornings instead of sitting in a synagogue on Shabbat. Okay? And I can tell you, it has nothing to do with your smartness and your theology. All right, so in principle, what do we have? He was in always tempted, but did not sin. He did not violate Torah. He did not violate the sins of death or the sins not unto death, right? 1 John chapter 5, verses 15 and 16, I believe it is. But what he did is he actually did not step into the realm of violating, breaking, not protecting, and not keeping Torah. Okay? So that's a very important point, right? That he was capable of it, but he didn't do it, which means we are capable of not doing it. Because if it was anything else special than that, he can't be our Messiah. He can't be the imputation. He made him who knew no sin. I'm going to teach you about no today. That's going to be an important one for you. I'm going to teach you about no. K-N-O-W. Okay? Now, the fifth element of this was he taught you things that your pulpit doesn't teach you. He taught you dominion. He taught you that you were an Elohim, a God. He taught you that it should be frivolous to command the waves and the wind. He taught you that it is more valuable that you are written in the book of heaven than it is to cast out a demon, and not one of you has cast out a demon. If you have, put it in the comments. And so, in principle, it is imperative for you to understand those 5 things cause your Messiah, Yeshua HaMashiach, right? Jesus Christ, to be something very, very different, but also very, very equal. Okay? We need to follow that and him imperatively. So now let's go back to our verse. Like I said, I don't know how far I'm going to get through this because we haven't even gotten out of Matthew 4 yet. Okay, here we go. Then Yeshua was led by the Ruach into the wilderness to be tempted there by the devil. For 40 days and 40 nights, he fasted and became very hungry. All right. And then during that time, the devil came and said to them, if you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become loaves of bread. But Yeshua told him, no, that's not right. Why? Because man shall not live on bread alone, but every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God, right? That's what he says. He says, man shall not live on bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. So where is this coming from? Well, the beauty of the NLT is it does give the footnotes, and here we are. Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 3. Okay, so now guess what? When we talk about seasons, which are cycles, and let me just go ahead and put that green line back up on there so you can remind yourself that that doesn't just come once, but repeats itself. Okay, so when there are cycles, there are mechanisms operating within those cycles. Well, watch this now, and you'll recall this from last week, that this word right here, wilderness, is midbar. And ba midbar is what? In the wilderness. Well, guess what? Let me just show you this. I know I said it last week, but I'm going to show you it this week. Okay? Here we go. Numbers chapter 1. And very specifically, we are going to right here. Okay? So let's go into there, and you'll see that that is going to be Bamidbar, right? Bamidbar. Here's Midbar.
Strong's H, 4057. Midbar.
Okay, so why did I do that? Because now you know the book of Numbers is not called the book of Numbers. Okay, that's not how Yeshua would have referred to it. That's not how Paul would have referred to it. He would have said Bamidbar. Now, here's the part that's important. Bamidbar is in the wilderness. So what's intriguing is that the next book, called Devarim, is the next season. Okay, and so the golden calf is Deuteronomy. The wilderness is Numbers. Now, why is that important? That's important for two reasons. First of all, that means that Deuteronomy is actually a toolkit for the golden calf season. That's important. That means that everything that pertains to life and godliness, right, that we've been given according to First Peter, or according to Second Peter chapter 3, chapter 1, verse 3, we have been given everything that pertains to life and godliness. I call that the easy button. You already have it. It's already in you. It just needs to be awoken. Okay? Everything, actually, that you need to accomplish this life just needs to be awoken within you. Okay? All right. So next, what we need to do then is look in Deuteronomy. But now I want you to think about this. The Spirit brings Yeshua where? Into the wilderness. In the wilderness. Midbar, right? So what does Yeshua understand? He's in a season that has something to do with his ego. And I will help you understand why in a minute. But let's just go to Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 3. Okay? Yes, he humbled you. Not you humbled you. He humbled you by letting you go hungry and then feeding you with manna, a food previously unknown to you and your ancestors. Listen now, he did it to teach you that people do not live by bread alone. Rather, we live by every word that proceeds from the mouth of Yahweh. Now, what do you need to understand? He's talking about this. Why? When did the manna come? Well, they were in the wilderness of Zin. The wilderness of Zin. They said, God brought us out here to die. For what shall we eat? What shall we drink? What does Yeshua say? Take no thought for what you shall eat or drink. Whoa. So our Messiah just gave us something to reference. This is called a remez in Hebrew teaching, right? A remez is a hint. He gave us a hint. Look back at the wilderness season to understand that you are to take no thought for what you shall eat or drink. Go look at the story that this person lived. Go look at the human who wrote the Bible through their life. Okay? Now that's going to be important. Now, it is absolutely important for you to understand that this right here, this red line is the ego line. Okay? And it is also important to understand that the ego line ebbs and flows. We'll get back to that. But what's absolutely, and when I say this, you're not going to listen to me because I might have a boring element that you're tuned out already, or it's offensive or uncomfortable. But you need to understand that there's a point in time where the intensification of all power in the universe absolutely kills your ego on purpose through a humbling. And when that happens, it is also totally important for you to understand that at that time, you have no control. And I'm just going to say this for the record. Get over it. Because you can't change it, control it, or operate its mechanism without going with the flow. And if you kick against the pricks, God's going to knock you off your horse on the road to Damascus, like he did Paul. And you can see, what did Yahweh tell? Let me take it back. What did Yeshua tell Annas? He said, Annas, you have no idea how much he's going to suffer for my name's sake. In other words, Annas was like, this dude kills Christians. This dude kidnaps people. This dude illegally arrests people in your name, in the name of God. And he's like, this guy really actually just needs a bunch of lashes and his head cut off. I'll cut his head off for you. Yahweh, I will. You just bring him to me and it'll be done. And Yahweh's like, no, you're actually going to heal his eyes and I'll take care of that mess. I will rock his world. And by the time he's done, he won't even understand what an ego is, right? So get over it. Having said that, the sovereignty of God is within this mechanism, but there's another element of this mechanism that, of course, we have identified, that the feast day season, and I'm about to draw it on the board, is the harvests. From beginning to end, reaping what you have sown. And so we're just going to put this up here really quick. Not in that pin, but in this pin. This right here is reaping. This is the reaping season, which means what? Part of your ego death will be what? A reciprocation. What does that mean? That means what goes around comes around. Your karma will meet you in the wilderness season, and your humbling will be the result of your bad behavior. In other words, and this is important, and this is what David says in Psalm 51. He says, have mercy on me, O God, for it is against you only that I have sinned. And I say this, although it doesn't really say that I say this, I'm paraphrasing. I say this so that you will be justified as you judge me. In other words, whatever comes my way in my seasons, I got it coming. And I'm aware. And so when the thing with Absalom happened, when the thing with Amnon happened, the thing with the baby happened, he knew. He got it. Registered, got it. Let me go make a note. He understood the mechanism that he would reap, right? That he would reap. And it was about reciprocation. Now, it is important for you to understand that as you decide, and I can tell you, I have a number of people in my congregation right now, including myself, who say, we are in the golden calf season. This is supposed to be the season of fatness. Where is my reward? And this is going to be my response. Whatever you have built up in your brain as your actions by which you believe that you should have a reward, I can defeat with all the secret and dark and bad things you have done this year. Now, I know that that actually really sucks. But what I'm trying to do is unseat you from the foolishness of your entitlement. Okay? You can be as angry as you want about that, and you can be as uncomfortable as you want about that. But truth be told, wilderness season is about reciprocation, reaping what you've sown. Now, what people miss and totally disconnect from is the fact that part of that harvest is this. It is the spiritual high. It is a reaping of those who hunger and thirst for that stuff that's not made of what man should live on. It's revelation. it's teaching, instruction, it's strength, it's energy, it's powerful, it's amazing. And truth be told, is I think that people miss it because of the wilderness aspect of the season. Your ego is gonna die. Now, that's a very easy thing because if you get your mind wrapped around the ego dying here, then you can get your mind wrapped around the spirit resurrecting here, rising here, having prominence here. Okay? But Deuteronomy is not for the wilderness season. Deuteronomy is actually for the golden calf season to teach you something which Yeshua responded to the devil with. Now, another teaching for another day, but that devil was his ego. And it is very important for you to understand up until the moment he died on the cross, it wasn't a cross. Don't think you can handle it if I don't call it a cross, so I call it a cross. If he didn't have an ego death, if he didn't have a dark night of the soul in which he subjected himself to the intuition of his higher self, which is Yahweh, he would not have died for you, and therefore would not have imputed the righteousness of God to you. I want you to think about what it means, because in a bit, we're going to start to address it. Okay, so this recap is really important because now you understand what season we are in right now, because Pentecost has already come. For those of you who are Christians, you probably didn't know it, but Pentecost came and went. Okay? For those of you who are Jews, you know it, but you don't really understand the mechanism of Pentecost. You don't understand this season at all because you don't understand the bride. Because when you were supposed to be getting your mind wrapped around wedding steps, you were getting your mind wrapped around why you think the Messiah didn't come. And that is especially a message for you anti-missionary rabbis. Okay, so in that process, we know Pentecost has already come. So as the year progresses around, let's go look at this really quick. Okay? Let's write these in. So in spring, we have Pentecost. I'm sorry, Passover. Not Easter, not the Feast of Ishtar, where children were sacrificed, and technically, in a weird sort of way, still are. Yeah, I won't talk about that one. Summer brings Pentecost. Not exactly on the March 21st or on June 21st, but summer brings Pentecost and fall brings tabernacles. So we're not going to worry about what winter brings, but what we are going to say is that there's obviously a cyclical mechanism to the feasts. Obviously, when we are dealing with this, we need to think in these terms. Now, there is one other very, very important thing that we need to put in here and we need to illustrate, and that is going to be that somewhere around this point, to somewhere around this point is also the flood, which is an absolute ego death, okay, of the whole universe. Now, Deuteronomy chapter 8 is not for the wilderness season. Yeshua quotes Deuteronomy as a tool because he's in the wilderness, but what wilderness is he in? He's in the golden calf wilderness. You say, well, wait a minute, we don't really know the timeline of when he was in the wilderness. You're missing the point. He chose a Deuteronomy scripture, which is a tool set for the golden calf season. You say, can you prove it? No, you know what? I can't. But what I can say is that this book, Numbers, is labeled in the wilderness, whereas this book, Deuteronomy, is labeled Devarim, things. And when we really get our minds wrapped around things, we might have some pretty powerful wisdom come our way, but we're not ready for that yet, I don't think. Or the revelation would have come by now. It's on the horizon. I can see glimpses of it. Okay. So now, as we go through this function of cycles and seasons, which is a mechanism of judgment and specifically reaping. What's judgment? You think that judgment is when somebody tells you that you're doing something wrong, even if they do it wrong. Wrong. That was a lot of wrongs. Judgment is an equal distribution of social justice. What's good for the rich person is good for the poor person. What's good for the widow is good for the orphan, etc. My point is that justice is an equal distribution of, that judgment is an equal distribution of justice, not consequence and reward in the sense that you would think about it. Because the point being is that a person is not going to receive a reward when they have not merited that reward, and a person is not going to receive a consequence when they have not merited that consequence. Now, that's the importance of Yom Kippur, which, quite frankly, anybody who sits in the pew on Sunday has no clue about. In fact, they think that Yeshua fulfilled Yom Kippur. Far from it. Okay. So now what we need to do is we need to start to focus on what is the difference between this red line being down here and this red line being up here. Because if you grasp that, you will understand the power that you actually have in this season. Okay, so in that sense, what we need to do is we need to accept that the golden calf season is the endurance. Okay? The golden calf season is about endurance, which means what? Adversity is going to come. But the difference between the adversity in the wilderness and the adversity in the golden calf season is this will be a provocation of your ego, and this will be a provocation of the spirit. The wilderness season will provoke the spirit to arise. The golden calf season will provoke the ego to arise. Now, you say, what is ego? What are you talking about? What is ego? Ego is, quite frankly, in its simplicity, the thing that thinks that it provides, that it protects, that it instructs, and the thing that thinks that those things are done as a result of itself and itself alone. Okay? Furthermore, the ego is an absolute adversary of Yahweh. That's right. The ego is Satan. Hasatan means the adversary. That is pronounced Satan in English, meaning what? Your ego is the devil. Okay? Now, why that's so important? Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that there isn't some malevolent entity that has focused its energy around an opposition to God. But what you have made it into is very inappropriate. And furthermore, is not the mechanism of your process of your life. Okay? Your ego is. And I will tell you that if you ever were to have an ego death and legitimately it stay dead, I'm sure that malevolent entity would get involved in the process. But he does not. I'm telling you, if there is a malevolent entity, what I'm not going to do is label it what the Vulgate does, and I'm not going to call it the Hebrew name, and I'm not going to do any of the other stuff. What I'm going to say is that entity is sitting in Cancun, catching a tan, drinking Mai Tais, because he has nothing to do. He's absolutely bored, because you are the problem. Okay? All right. So now it is very important that in this process of ego death, that we realize that this is an ego resurrection. And we realize that the ego resurrection that occurs during the golden calf actually is provoked. Whereas the spirit is stirred, the waters are stirred in this season, right here. The ego is stirred in this season. You say, wait a minute, how could that be? What is the deal? Well, it's real simple. All that happens is you are no longer pulled into the adversity. What I mean by that is in this season, the intensification of all power in the universe kills your ego. I let you go hungry, right? And look at what it says in verse 3. Yes, he humbled you. He humbled you by letting you go hungry. Now, if you want proof that this season is actually your season, whereas this is Yahweh's season, this is the bride's responsibility, this is the groom's responsibility, this is the perseverance of the saints, this is the blood of the saints, then you will get your mind wrapped around what needs to happen in this season. Watch. You'll notice, let's do this. Let's go here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this dark blue, and this dark blue is going to represent my pointer. Okay, so at this point right here is the Feast of Tabernacles. Let's talk a minute about that. He says, when you come into cities you have not built, and houses you have not constructed, and you dwell in them, once a year you will go out into the wilderness for about 10 days, and you will dwell in booths. You will dwell in sukkot, right? You will dwell in a sukkah. You will dwell in a temporary shelter to remember the wilderness season. So the end of the feast day cycle ends with you remembering the wilderness. Now watch this, and this is important. Tabernacles is not the first feast of fall. Okay? So coming back over here, Tabernacles is not the first fall feast. The first fall feast is actually Yom Teruah. Okay? Yom Teruah. And then after that, Yom Kippur. Sorry, Kippur. It's an U, not a Yom Kippur. Okay? Or as they say it in the South, Yom Kippur. Okay, so Yom Kippur is what? It is in the golden calf season. Oh man, when you get your mind wrapped around this is going to blow your head off. All right, watch this. Watch this. Now, this is the part right here. Here is Yom Kippur. Here is trumpets. Here is the golden calf. Okay? That right there, this right here is the moment of ego resurrection. And I can tell you that doesn't necessarily correspond to the 17th of Tammuz, as the rabbis have determined is the day that the golden calf occurred. But what you do need to understand is that season of those 3 weeks between the 17th of Tammuz and the 9th of Av is a season within a season. Just like counting the Omer is a season within a season. Okay? Just like Yom Teruah is a season within a season. Okay? Now, the reason why that is important is because when we go to this part right here, when we are looking at that bad boy right there, you need to realize that the decline of the ego is because the soul is preparing for Yom Teruah. Now, when we get into the depth of this in this teaching, because we haven't even touched it yet, when we get into the depth of this teaching, you're going to understand that your soul is on course with the biorhythms of the soul. I call them biorhythms because that's the closest I can get to what's actually happening, like a circadian rhythm where as darkness starts to fall and melatonin is released, but as soon as light comes back, the melatonin is reduced and other elements are introduced into the bloodstream so that you will arise, and within that, your body knows how many days it has been, and for the ladies, when to start your cycle, based upon the rise and fall of this nuclear fission reactor in the sky. Okay? So, it is important in this that you get that this is a mechanism of the soul. Your soul is going to tend towards tabernacles. Tend towards tabernacles. Okay? But what's amazing about it is, watch this. First of all, it is important for you to understand that what you think you understand about the English Bible is not sufficient for you to live a lifestyle of the Bible. You need to realize that the culture, the lifestyle, the language play a role in the application of it. Okay? Any renegotiation of it is actually you picking and choosing, cherry picking the Bible. Okay? So let's jump back into our text. And what we're going to do is look at this word. Yes, he humbled you. Right? Okay, let's just really quick, let's talk about how did he humble? He humbled them by what? Letting them go hungry. Going without food equals humility. Now watch. Here we go. Yes, he let you go hungry, right? He humbled you. Here's that word right there. Let's hear our buddy say it.
Strong's H 6031. Anah.
Okay. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go down to Leviticus. You say, how do you know Leviticus is there? Oh, I know. Chapter 23, verse 27. It says, be careful to celebrate the Day of Atonement on the 10th day of the same month, 9 days after the Festival of Trumpets. You must observe as an official day for assembly, a day to deny yourselves. Let's go look. Right? A day to deny yourselves, right? Or to fast. Let's go see. To humble. yourselves. So we fast on Yom Kippur. We go without food. If you ever wondered why we do, it's because of Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 3, that says that humility is the result of hunger. Okay? Now, when you get into the ancient Hebrew nomadic lifestyle, you'll know that the idiom for death is actually an empty stomach, and the idiom of life is a full stomach. Okay? And if you go back to the ancient Hebrew nomadic lifestyle and look at the people of the Bible, you will see that famine played a very big role in their movement. Okay? And they were steered by famine. Jacob down to Egypt, which resulted in the Israelites becoming slaves of Egypt. Weren't really slaves, but anyways, they were subjected to a binding agreement or the house of bondage with Egypt. And then what? They were delivered. They were Yeshua'd. They were violently, let's see, firstborn killed, death, violence. They were violently removed from their circumstances. Okay? Okay. So what do we have here? We have anah being the word for humble, and humble being that you have to go without food. Now, what's very, very important for you to understand is that there's a tool built into the system. And that tool that's built into the system is to say that when Yeshua was in the wilderness, driven by the Spirit, right? In the wilderness, driven by the Spirit, after those days, he was hungry, right? And so what's interesting is as we go through this, you'll see the rise of his ego. You'll see the devil, the slanderer, say, if you're the Son of God, what is that? That's doubt, right? Think about this. Paul says, in fact, I will read it to you word for word. That's what I'll do. And the reason I will is because I think you don't get this. And I think you need to get it. And until you wake up and get it, you will have problems in life. In fact, you will have more problems because you're all bound up into this Christian mechanism instead of being a liberated human being by the mechanism of imputation that Yeshua gave you. You'll understand that later on in a minute. Okay, so now when we say this, we say that we're going to go, I'm going to say, let's do New King James Version. That's the version I memorized it in. So when I try to read it, I will say the New King James, even if I don't actually have it up on the screen. Okay, because I memorized it. But here we are. We will start in, yeah, you know what? Let's start in verse 3, because boy, do you Christians hate the Torah. For what the law could not do, in that it was weak in the flesh, weak in the ego, God did. Oh, this is like wilderness season, right? God's doing it by sending his own son in the likeness of sinful flesh, in the likeness of a sinful ego, right? Because he's in all ways tempted, but doesn't sin. On the account of sin. In other words, for the sake of it, because of it. He condemned sin in the flesh. He actually condemned sin in the ego. The ego fell under judgment. That the righteous requirement of Torah might be what? Might be carried out by us who do not walk according to the ego, but according to the Ruach HaKodesh, or the intuition of the higher self. For those who live according to the ego set their minds on the things of the ego. But those who live according to the higher self and the intuition thereof, the things of the higher self and the intuition thereof. For to be carnally minded, to be ego-minded is death, an empty belly, lack and decrease, judgment, reaping what you sow, which is corruption, because you sowed to the ego. But to be spiritually minded, to be intuitive, to the higher self, who is Yahweh, who is you, minded, to think that way is life, a full belly, not lack and decrease, and shalom. Because the ego is enmity against Elohim. Enmity, that means adversary against Elohim. So let me read this way. Because the ego thinking is Satan. Let's do it this way. The ego thinking is Satan against Elohim, against the Elohim, any Elohim. For it is not subject to the Torah of Elohim, nor indeed can it be. So then those who are in their ego cannot please Elohim. But you who are not in the ego, but in the spirit, what's the spirit? Are in the intuition of the higher self, who is Yahweh, who is you. If indeed the intuition dwells within you. Now, if anyone does not have the intuition of Yeshua, oh, that's going to be big later on, he is not his. And if Yeshua, or the Messiah, who's what? A people mover, an elevator, if the elevator is not, or is in you, the what? The ego is dead because of a violation of Torah. But the ego, or the intuition of the higher self, which is Yahweh, who is you, is life, a full belly, because of equal distribution of the energy of God, the wealth of God, the glory of God. But if the intuition of the higher self, who is Yahweh, which is you, who raised Yeshua from the dead, dwells in you, he who raised the Messiah from the dead, an empty belly, will also give life to your ego through his intuition that is within you. Whoa, that almost says that he's going to provoke your ego during the golden calf season. But let's just keep going. Therefore, we are debtors not to the ego to live according to the ego. For if you live according to the ego, you will fall into lack and decrease. But if by the intuition of what? The higher self, who is Yahweh, who is you, put to death the deeds of the ego, you will not have lack and decrease. For as many are in the intuition of the higher self, which is Yahweh, who is you, these are sons of God. If thou be son of God, command these stones to become bread. Ego. I don't know if I really am the son of God. But the truth be told is that's what you say to yourself all the time. And we're going to get to that. Because what you don't register is that when he's being tempted to doubt that he's a son of God, he is not being tempted to doubt that he is the son of God in the sense of some connection to some triune being, but instead the same problem that we have, because he had to be in all ways tempted, including the fear of belief in the truth that you are the righteousness of God. Now, for you did not receive the intuition of bondage by which you fear, but you received the intuition of an adoption by which you cry out, Abba, you realize he is the Father. He is the pole that holds up the tent, like we taught last week. Now watch this. The intuition that is the higher self, who is Yahweh, that is you, bears witness, observes with our intuition that we are children. Remember the wall of the tent of Elohim. And if children, in other words, if we are indeed sons of God, let me read it for you, then heirs, heirs of God and joint heirs with Mashiach, the elevator. If indeed we suffer with him, and that word suffer is a horrible interpretation of that word, but fine. If indeed we suffer with him, that we may be glorified together. Listen, y'all Trinitarians missed it. Missed it. You Sunday morning pew sitters missed it. Because you have been deceived. You've been tricked into believing a certain way. And we're going to get into that today. You're going to understand how your ego actually plays a role in the falseness of your religion. We're going to get there. Okay, so now, what do we understand? We understand that when it says, if you be the Son of God, there's no difference between him and us. He needed to be tempted to what? React to that doubt. He needed to be tempted to not believe that he was what he was created to be. And how are we going to prove it to ourselves? We're going to convert this bread or these stones into bread. Right? Now, what's important? He hasn't eaten. But who made that choice? Was he made to not eat by the intuition within him, or was he made not to eat by his choice? Both. He's driven into the wilderness. He's choosing not to eat. Man shall not live on bread alone, but every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. Now watch this, and this is important. Remember, it said he humbled you. He humbled you. He killed your ego. But the resurrection of your ego begins at Pentecost. Oh, you're not ready for this. The resurrection of your ego, that part that raises Christ from the dead, gives life to your mortal bodies, is absolutely about the ego. There is no other way to read Romans and reference this. You have to think like a Pharisee, because that's who he was writing to. And the Pharisees believed that the ego was Hasatan. And the Pharisees believed that the flesh, as it's called, the sarx in Greek, the basar in Hebrew, had nothing to do with the actual human physiology. Give life to your mortal bodies is quite frankly saying, I will resurrect the ego. And the reason I will is because what happens next. And this is so powerful. And I could tell you, if you get your mind wrapped around this mechanism, I understand that I may hype things more than what they actually occur. But you will have those aha moments and you'll go, oh, this is exactly what Q was talking about. Okay, so here's how it works. We go into that book that no Christian who claims they are a Gentile should be reading. James chapter 4, right? And James chapter 4 goes through all this stuff about lust and wars and not having and not asking and being adulterers and all this stuff, right? But then in verse 7, it says, therefore submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Now watch this. Let's go into the Young's literal because he's going to do a good job of interpreting the Greek here. Be subject then to God. Stand up against the devil, and he will flee from you. Did that instruction come from James? No, it came from your Messiah, who told you how to handle this. Now watch this. Draw nigh to God, and he will draw nigh to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you too sold. Uh-oh, we're going back to the world thing, aren't we? Be exceedingly afflicted and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned into, or be your laughter to mourning and be turned, and the joy to heaviness. Now watch this. We're going to go into this word afflicted. The Greek word for afflicted is going to be talipero. I'm going to let this dude do it.
Strong's G 5003. Teleporeo. Teleporeo.
Let's hear it again.
Strong's G 5003. Teleporeo. Teleporeo.
Okay, so now let's see if we can take a look at this. So it is made up of a couple words, right? So we'll go ahead and go into that. All right, enduring toils and troubles. Okay, and if we look at it, there's no Hebrew here, so we'll go ahead and go deeper. We'll go into this one, and what do we have? We have a scale of balances, right? Okay, so affliction is about justice, right? Affliction is about having an equal distribution of social justice applied to you, and you will mourn. And you will weep. And your laughter will be turned to mourning, and your joy to heaviness. Okay? And so now be made low before the Lord, and he shall exalt you. Okay, now the way that this works is if we are to go into a different version, let's say we go into the New King James, because that's what I memorized it in. Listen to what it actually says here. Submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Where did James learn that? From Yeshua's temptation, right? Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you, right? Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Okay, that all works. Lament and mourn. When do we do that? Yom Kippur, right? Let your laughter be turned into mourning. 9th of Av, right? Your joy to gloom. 17th of Tammuz. Humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he will lift you up. And in some versions, I think maybe it's the NSB. Let's take a look here. I believe that it actually says, and he will exalt you. And in another, I tell you what, let's go look at it in the actual Bible comparison. Because what I'm looking for is, yes, NLT. He will lift you up into a place of honor. I did not want to go to the copyright. I wanted to go to the NLT. He will lift you up into a place of honor. That is one of the reasons why I like the NLT, because it actually interprets some of the idioms for you. Doesn't do a great job of it, but from time to time, it does come in beneficial. So when we are thinking about this now, we can understand that this has to do with Yom Kippur. This has to do with the golden calf season. Now, you guys know that actually there is a belief that sometime during the 3 weeks between the golden calf and between the golden calf and the ninth of Av, the Israelites refused to go into the wilderness. I'm sorry, into the promised land. So now, first and foremost, and this is important, am I telling you to not eat during this season? No. But what I will say is that you are commanded to not eat from this point to this point. Meaning what? Let's actually look at that a little bit closer here. Let's do a zoom in on this specific area. Okay. Oh, that didn't quite work the way that I wanted it to. Let me try it one more time here. Let's zoom in on this specific area. Okay. There we go. All right. So now, what are we looking at? We are looking at the time between Pentecost and Tabernacles, and microcosmically, we are looking at there we go. Microcosmically, we are looking at this area right here, which is called the 10 days of awe, in which you are instructed to prepare yourself for this day when you will fast. You are commanded not to eat on that day. Now, it is important for you to understand that the instructions concerning Yom Kippur are in Isaiah 58, because evidently the people needed more instruction than what they had been given here. So why is this so important? Because what I want you to get your mind wrapped around is that whereas in one season you are experiencing a forced ego death, you have to choose the ego death here. And what's important for you to know is that that ego death is going to be Satan speaking to you in the manner in which Satan does what he does. Your ego is going to try to convince you that Moses didn't bring you out of the promised land, but this golden calf did. I was on a live the other night on a TikTok, and we midrashed the parasha, and there's a portion in there about being disobedient to Torah and the rain not falling as a result of worshiping idols. And I went in to explain that what was present within them had nothing to do with the golden calf. Well, that's a good segue into the beginning of this teaching, because one of the things that we are going to need to do, and we may not be able to get into it much in this time because I don't want to do a 4-hour thing here, and that's the amount of information you don't have yet. But at the very least, you know what this season is going to hold. The slanderer is going to be provoked to life. And when he is, you have to choose to kill it. Here you were humbled. Deuteronomy 8:3. Here you will be tempted to command the stones to become bread. Why? Because you're hungry. See, that's the part that people don't get. They had this huge feast in the wilderness, the manna. But here, in this part, the manna becomes loathsome. And the anguish of the heart as you experience less of what you had during the wilderness season will provoke your ego to shake your fist and build the golden calf. Now, the time between 17th of Tammuz and the 9th of Av is this time of swimming through sludge as you ride the gondola up the mountain. And then right as the 9th of Av occurs, the universe releases you from the sludge, and now it is your time to shine. But truth be told, is what needs to be happening in this time is not the impatience of where did this Moses go? Do you hear the people say, we don't know where Moses went? What is that? That's timing. That's a belief that it hasn't happened fast enough. That's a belief that it actually should be here by now, and it's not fair. But you will recall that this ebb and flow continues. Watch now. As we hit tabernacles, off it goes again into a season of spiritual rise and fall as we begin to approach the light of Passover and we approach the concealments which are in between the festival of Purim and the last day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It is so important for you to understand how this ebb and flow has to do with whether you allow the humbling to occur and rise in spiritual power, or you humble yourself in order to be risen into spiritual power. It is the difference between the masculine and the feminine. It is the difference between the who and the how and the what and the why. It is the difference between the bride and the groom. It is the difference between the receiver and the giver. Now, it's important that you understand the mechanisms of receiving and giving, because if there was ever a time for you to really lock in and think about you pushing outward your energy out to others, regardless of the fact that you're still in the wilderness, what is so powerful about this? This is the one that people miss in my teachings. They say, oh, the feast day season, but we went through the wilderness season and that was horrible and hungry, but at the same time it was a spiritual high. And oh, now we're here to Pentecost, and that's like this very special season. And the Pentecostal season, or the season from Pentecost to Tabernacles, is this like wonderful bliss or whatever. And truth be told, is, and I'm gonna do it in a bright color so that you really grasp this. All of this is the wilderness. They were not at the promised land yet. And within context, they were not anywhere different than where they were here after the manna and the water came and the protection came, because there were no marauders after this. Who became the enemy of God here? Amalek? No. Israel. And why? Because Moses was taking too long. God was taking too long. We'll do it our way. We'll decide what time in which Moses should come down the mountain. Now, in the deep spiritual stuff, there is an understanding that they did this to bring Moses back down the mountain. But it's imperative that you understand that that didn't change the fact that they fell under the judgment. And it doesn't change the fact that it was a provocation of their ego that caused them to do this in the first place. They had the manna. They had the water. You had your season. Listen, and listen, there is a song in Judaism called Dayenu. And Dayenu is actually sung during the Passover. And it says, if you would have done this, if you would have only done this, that would have been enough. This right here was enough. One taste of the manna would have been enough. But you rained it down for 7 days. I'm sorry, 6 days. And on the 7th, we didn't even have to gather. But if you would have just rained the manna down for 7 days, that would have been enough. But you brought water from the rock. Do you see where your ungratefulness is actually provoked by the removal of the things? And it's actually your ego. It is the enemy, the Satan of God. And let me tell you something. Let me tell you what the Satan of God can do. It can create light interceptors. And depending on how much those light interceptors are fed before they are cast out, guess what? You will lose a lot of light. And what's interesting is your ego will tell you, your Satan will tell you, you as Satan will tell yourself that everything's okay, will tell yourself that you actually are making the effort because there is actually no spirit. When the truth is that the only effort you need to be making is to get as small as you possibly can. And I'm going to take it a step further. Get your butt under whatever it is that's around you. You be the lowest thing. Listen, I'm going to tell you guys something. I have successfully completed the ascension and the getting to the top of 6 14ers. And those are 14,000 foot peaks that are in Colorado and are kind of like the only place where they really exist. But the premise is that it takes a very special kind of understanding when you were doing it. Mountaineering is a very, very different sport. And there are a number of things that are absolutely very important. But one of the most important ones is lightning safety. Why? Because you are above tree level. Which means what? You're the tallest thing. Now, what's the beauty of 14ers is they are surrounded by boulders. So if you can get lower than a boulder, you will not be struck. Now, it doesn't mean you won't get some fizzies, because let me tell you, that's happened. But you won't be struck. Now, there's a number of safety pieces of equipment. There's some lightning attractors and things like that you can set up and do other things. But the shortest version of your lightning safety is to be lower than whatever it is around you. What a powerful illustration. We are going to endure climbing this thing. And we are going to endure losing what we had during the counting of the Omer. And we are going to humble ourselves, not only through fasting and through prayer, but we are going to let our egos die. We are going to endure the fears. We are going to endure the scarcity. We are going to endure the doubt. We are going to endure the frustration, the anguish, the impatience by saying, Dayanin, it is enough. And not only that, but we are going to follow the commandments of Yahweh that give us the instruction to humble ourselves during that season. I'm going to add another season to the board, a season within a season. Here, in that moment, I'm going to leave it white, but I'm going to come back to my blue here. In that moment is the beginning of the 6th month. And in the 6th month, what we are experiencing is what? The 40 days of introspection. 10 of which are the days between Yom Kippur and Yom Teruah. Let me swap those. Between Yom Teruah and Yom Kippur chronologically. 10 days, what we call the 10 days of awe, in which, just like it says in the book of Revelation, the books are open. And how are you judged? By the Torah. It doesn't matter whether you believe in, hate, or are afraid of keeping or of exploring the Torah. The Torah does not care whether you believe in it or not. It is the mechanism of justice, equal distribution of justice. And what you need to realize is that when those books are open, they're going to look at your behavior. They're going to look at the list and say, up, that's a violation of that. Now we need to create a reciprocation that's going to come during the wilderness season to make up for that. Now, if you think for a second this has to be stuck within the spring, summer, fall, you don't understand how sin and Yom Kippur works. Yom Kippur is going to return upon you what you sow, period. You sow to the flesh, you reap corruption. What's corruption? Lack and decrease, empty stomach. What is sowing to the spirit? What is the spirit? The intuition of the higher self, who is Yahweh, that is you. Okay? And so the way that I want you to think about this is to understand that as a son of God, you are operating as the higher self. That's what it says. The Spirit, if you walk according to the Spirit, then the Spirit will bear witness that you are a son of God. And if a son of God, then you are an heir. An heir to what? Let's talk about heirs for a minute. Are we talking about an inheritance that is some room full of treasures? Like some of the stupid sermons I've heard. Oh, you're going to have all this gold in heaven. It's so precious and blah, blah, blah. Oh, come on with all that. If you can't understand a simple idiom, why are you even in the pulpit? But I will put out there, and this is important, that those treasures, this is another teaching, but those treasures that you store up in heaven, you can write a check on that bank account while you're here. Okay, so now, let's see. I think that I could probably get through this part pretty quickly. And if I can, I think I can break the rest up into like next week or whatever. But let's see if we can go through this part here. So we are going to Philippians chapter 2, verse 6. Okay? Philippians chapter 2, verse 6. Now, there is a number of issues with this verse, depending on, let's see, we'll go this way, depending on which version of the Bible you read. So we're going to run through these just really quick. Though he was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. That's the NLT. Let's do King James. Who, being the form of God, thought it not robbery to be equal with God. Okay, let's do Hebrew Names version. Who, existing in the form of God, didn't consider it robbery to be equal with God. Let's do Young's literal translation. Who, being the form of God, thought it not robbery to be equal with God. Now, when we read Paul like a Gentile Christian, you can go to the mirror, look in the mirror, point at yourself and say, you are stupid. Because the mistake that is made as a result of that is deadening to your entire spiritual experience. Okay? Now, I don't want you to go to the mirror and tell yourself you're stupid, because you're not stupid. You're actually a high maintenance child of God, and very specifically the righteousness or the equal distribution of the wealth of God, which consequently is the glory or the energy, the dunamis of God. Okay? Now, robbery. Let's talk a minute about robbery. If a man is stealing in order to feed himself, what does Torah say is supposed to be done? If a man is stealing in order to support himself, what does Torah say must be done? If the intensification of all power in the universe stuffed into an understandable God says you are robbing him, what does Torah say is to be done? You see, you need to look at the word robbery. You need to look at the word clung or grasped or snatched, right? You need to look at the concept that in the Hebrew Names version, the Young's literal translation, the New King James, the Old King James, all say robbery. It was not robbery, stealing, taking something that is not yours to be equal with God. Okay? Now we can deal with this a little bit better. So, in fact, I am going to actually go into the New King James on this, because this, again, is one of the ones I memorized. So I'm going to read it as I memorize it instead of reading the version that it's on. Who, being in the form of God, did not consider it robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, taking the form of a bondservant and coming in the likeness of men. The Torah became flesh and dwelt among us. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point, even the death of the cross. It wasn't a cross. Therefore, God also has highly exalted him and given him the name which is above every name. Oh, look at this mechanism that James mentions, that Deuteronomy mentions, that now we see is part of this process, that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow, of those in heaven and those on earth and of those under the earth, and that every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Now, just real quick, before I get too caught up in this, what I want to do is I want to go in and look at a very specific verse, and that is going to be in Joel chapter 3, I believe it is verse 17. might be in chapter 2. There's a weird thing that happens with the Hebrew in Joel, chapter 2 and 3, where part of 2 is cut off in the English and is thrown on the back or on the front of part 3 and vice versa. So let's see if maybe I am close to where I need to be here. Yes, I am. Okay, so it's Joel chapter 2 verse 32, but in the Hebrew it's actually going to be Joel chapter 3 verse 2, I believe. Okay, it shall come to pass that whoever calls on the name of Yahweh shall be saved. Let me show you this now. Watch this. We're going to go in here, and what we're going to do is we're going to look at this right here. That is the name of Yahweh. That is the name of God. Now, some of you may say, oh, well, actually, Nehemiah Gordon went to the Catholic archives and found that the earliest manuscripts he could look at, which was, I guess, was like over 100, is pronounced Yehovah. You know what? I don't care. My spirit tells me to say Yahweh, I'm going to say Yahweh. And Nehemiah can get over it. I really love the man and I respect him, but that part is just absolutely ridiculous what he's gotten himself into. Okay, so in this way, it is imperative that you understand that this is saying whoever calls on the name of Yahweh will be saved, right? Okay, Christians, I'm about to crack your skulls. Here we go. Romans chapter 9. I'm sorry, chapter 10. Starting in verse 9. That if you confess with your mouth that the Lord Jesus, confess with your mouth the Lord Jesus and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For the heart of one believes unto righteousness, and with the mouth confession is made unto salvation. For the scripture says, whoever believes on him will not be put to shame. That's Joel. Look. I'm sorry, Isaiah 20:16. But there's also a verse like that in Joel. But now watch this. For there's no distinction between Jew and Greek, for the same Lord is over all, is rich to all who call upon him. For whoever calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. Paul quotes Joel. What did Joel say? Whoever calls on the name of Yahweh will be saved. Furthermore, it says that it is not a Jew who causes that to be true. Now, we already understand that salvation has nothing to do with, or the word salvation has nothing to do with all of the soteriology, which is probably fifth year theological student, as we understand it today, that is presented to you who sit in the pew on Sunday morning and have to hear week by week about salvation and about whether it's a salvation issue, which has got to be one of the absolutely most conscious, violating, ridiculous things that I have ever heard. Oh, it's not a salvation issue, so I can do it. You people. Okay, so here's issue number 1. Who told you that you are not equal with God? Did the Bible or did your pastor? Because I'll bet that when you went and you said the sinner's prayer, which in and of itself is a violation of Joel chapter 2, verse 32, which says, call on the name of Yahweh. So you better get your head wrapped around what that means. But then we're just going to take it a step further and say, whoever calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. Somewhere along the lines, you need to get your head wrapped around what Paul is saying here. He's saying in chapter 10, verse 9 of Romans, if you confess with your mouth that the Lord Jesus, okay? Now, in the Young's literal translation, which is going to be a better word for word translation, we see it say that if thou mayest confess with thy mouth Yahweh Yeshua, that Yahweh is my salvation. You see where Paul was writing in Hebrew here, not Greek, and this is how it got screwed up. That Yahweh is Yeshua, and mayest believe in thy heart that Elohim did raise him out of the dead, thou shalt be saved. Saved from what? Well, Paul makes a reference to what that is when you go into Joel chapter 2. Okay? But we got to take it a step further, because somewhere in there it talks about that we were saved from the wrath to come, etc., etc. And I know that we have a problem in Revelation that can very easily turn into a huge argument about hell, right? Where death, hell, and the grave are cast into the bottomless pit, etc. And then we also have this thing where cast into the lake of that burns with fire, and that is the second death, and blah blah blah. But what you don't get and don't understand is the idiomatic usages in the book of Revelation. So while you're trying to secure your asbestos underwear so you don't have to worry about hell, which is an absolutely manufactured doctrine by those who would love to control you, which I'm going to prove in a second. Well, I'm not going to prove it, but I'm going to tell you in a second. You need to understand that you are supposed to be thinking like somebody who does not consider it robbery to be equal with God. And then I'm going to take it a step further and say, Yeshua taught you this and you didn't listen. You like sitting in the pew and being told what to do because you are pre-programmed to be a sheeple. You are pre-programmed to not think for yourself. You are pre-programmed to believe that you need a spiritual leader to guide you, and you can't yourself into it. But now we get to the part of this that is so absolutely imperative, that when we talk about Yeshua being Yahweh Elohim, that was not a unique attribute of the Christ. The Messiah is a human. The Messiah is a people mover. The Messiah is an elevator. And every single last individual on the face of the earth who has elevated a people in some way is a Messiah. Proof is Cyrus. Cyrus, my Messiah. Cyrus, my Messiah, is who will release you back to Jerusalem. Now, it is absolutely imperative that you understand what you have been taught about salvation is wrong. Absolutely wrong. You see, what you were taught is that salvation was a preservation from a damnation as a result of you being born evil. What a vomitous accusation against Yahweh. What an absolute dereliction of a belief about what this is all about. See, if you could grasp the concept that as the bride, you do, as the husband, he does, and that there's a marriage between the two. There's a one flesh. There's an intercourse. You see, knowledge is not accumulation of information. It's intercourse. And that is the difference between an uncircumcised Philistine pew sitter and a Hebrew nomadic mystic. As I understand that when you bring the feminine attribute of the intensification of all power in the universe together with the masculine attribute of the intensification of all power in the universe, there is synergy. As each fulfills their role separately, and as they fulfill their role separately together, something amazing happens to the universe. Because now God can be sovereign and she can still have free will. And here's the power. And this is an amazing context, is that when you start to think of yourself as equal with God, because you were told you were an Elohim by your Messiah, you were told that the entire kingdom of heaven, take every single last kingdom of heaven parable and stuff it into you. and you will understand what the inheritance is. It is the absolute seat on the throne, but only during the season in which that is to be done. When we should be actually operating as the bride in our season of dominion and all that other stuff, when we should be doing that, when it's our time to shine, we are building doubt. We are building fear. In fact, there's actually an ancient rabbinical study that I can't remember what it's called right now, that takes the gematria from the golden calf and the gematria from fear and doubt, the words for fear and the words for doubt, and actually there isn't really a Hebrew word for doubt, but the lack of trust, right? Which is lo bitzach, actually are equal. The gematria from the two are equal. And therefore, the golden calf is actually fear and doubt. But here's the part that's so powerful about this. What does that mean? That means that A, if your ego is in operation, if you notice it, this is the time. This is not the time to be doing those opposite things, because I cannot explain to you what is going to happen at Yom Kippur if you don't do this correctly. And listen, a human being who's sitting in the pew on Sunday morning is already blowing it. The Christmas and Easter Christian has already blown it. They're already in a positional curse of Christmas and Easter and not the feast days. So they haven't even arrived at the level of judgment that you fall under who observe Torah. Or worse, those who teach it. If you find that things are difficult during this season on a level that you never realized, you probably are a teacher. If you find that it's somewhat difficult, and yeah, it's the summer, and it is what it is, right? There's gas prices are always this way, this is always this way, etc., etc. You're probably not a teacher. If you're still sitting in the pew, you're still cursed from the other feasts that you have decided to honor. You decided to believe the lie that Paul and Peter went to Rome and told the people in Rome to keep Easter. A lie that was coined by the bishop who actually was in argument with Polycarp, who consequently didn't quite make it to the Council of Nicaea because he was put to death because he refused to say that Caesar was God. And yet we have this whole group of bishops in Rome at the Council of Nicaea who weren't put to death. Just saying. And isn't it ironic that what's on the chopping block? Torah, which consequently you sitting in the pew today believe is what? A curse, a burden, right? Let me tell you the level of inappropriateness here. The thing that is supposed to give you the blessing, according to Moses, unless he was lying to the people, the thing that Paul said brings life, you have decided is an abomination. And woe to those who call evil good and good evil. Now, this is where it gets hairy. I want you to understand, there is not within the confines of those who are in charge of other people in the history of mankind who do not have Torah as their governor, your interest in mind. What do I mean by that? I mean the popes, the kings, the Lutheran priest do not have your best interest in mind. They believe you can't handle what actually is the truth about what is taught in this book, and that you can handle what Yeshua actually said. So they tweaked it. They altered the prayers. They altered they altered the Our Father. They altered all of these different things. And Don, promise you, I am not making false accusations here. You dig deep enough, not only will you start getting weird phone calls, but you will find out the truth. Okay? So don't take my word for it. Go dig, and you will find how much your New Testament was altered, including the Lord's Prayer. Now, having said that, it's very, very important for me to say this one single thing. You began this journey with a desire for a relationship with God, but you don't understand your relationship with God because there's 5 things that you have messed up. And I'm going to go ahead and finish these 5 things. I'm going to tell you why. Even though that we're already an hour or 2.5 hours into this, I want you to grasp this. Actually, more like 2 hours into this. Number 1, you do not believe you are equal with God, and therefore you are accusing him of being a tyrant when he wanted to share everything with his bride. Everything. His desire, his initial desire, as the intensification of all power in the universe, was to make his bride equal with him. But through her shame, anguish, and frustration with the receiving process, became what? Subject to him. He's sovereign. He's big. He's the biggest thing. There is nothing else. So there's a point in time where you got to get over it. But he wanted to make her equal. Now, the reason why this happened is because she realized that she couldn't give anything to him. Well, that's not fair. Nothing in life is free. So therefore, now I have to what? I have to try to give something to God. You want to give something to God? Then receive what he has for you and stop thinking that that means that everything's going to be puppies and kittens. Okay? That's number 1. Because I can tell you some of the most beautiful stories have come out of the most heinous of lives. Okay? Number 2, if you are not equal with God, then you are subject. And guess what? That's really convenient for the kings and priests and rulers and presidents. In other words, it is very inconvenient to say that you're equal with God and still be a ruler over you. Okay? 3, you do not love yourself enough to believe what I'm saying. And that is absolutely the problem. Your wounds have told you that you are this thing. Your entitlements have convinced you that you deserve this thing. Your limiting beliefs have told you that you will never attain to this thing. Your imagination that you waste on your fears and doubts has not given you the power to do what it is that you are actually capable of, that Yeshua told you should be frivolous to you, compared to the fact that you are in the book, that your name is written in heaven. Boy, if you understood the level of that, you need to grasp the part where the mechanism and all the pieces that are involved with Yeshua, going back to Philippians. But did empty himself, the form of a servant having taken, in the likeness of men having been made, and in fashion having been found as a man, he humbled himself, having become obedient unto death, death even of a cross, where also God did highly exalt him and gave him a name that is above every name, in that in the name of Yeshua every knee may bow, of the heavenlies and earthlies and what are under the earth. Well, you guys don't have it. You guys have no idea what's being said here. But and every tongue may confess that Jesus is Yahweh, and what? To the glory of Elohim the Father. Now, here is the part that's so important. People want to put Yeshua in this category in which is unattainable to us. Don't get me wrong. All of the things that are said about him are true in his power and wisdom and example and the soul of who he is. But that doesn't make you incapable. You see, that's where we are all screwed up, and your pew sitting is making it worse. Because all you do is walk away from the pew, or you walk away from the pew, you go out into the world and you parrot. Instead of taking the context of the Hebrew nomadic lifestyle that every single last servant of God who wrote or was a part of the Bible practiced, and applying it to these letters that Paul wrote, you are doing whatever it is that Christians do today. It drives me crazy sometimes what I hear. But now let me show you the fourth one. I believe we're on the fourth one. Yeah, the fourth one, which is so dangerous. The ego. I want you to think about the ridiculousness of the doctrine of salvation. First of all, number one, you can't keep Torah, which means that if you try to keep Torah, you'll violate it. And if you'll violate it, then we need a substitutionary sacrifice, which is a load of hogwash, because blood of bulls and goats never offered a remission of sin, which means what? They never had a substitutionary sacrifice, and they were always in the favor of God. And furthermore, the action of sacrificing is actually to activate table fellowship, which is a way in which to return to the inheritance, which has nothing to do with salvation, but has everything to do with being a human. Because Yeshua said, you are the light of the world. He didn't say, if you believe in my name, you are the light of the world. He said, you are already the light of the world. We've already been given everything that pertains to life and godliness. We have already been given everything that we need. We just need to awaken it, activate it, live it, and be it. And now here's the part that's absolutely imperative. Your ego says that you can do something about your salvation. Let me show you. What is a good Christian? A good Christian is somebody who what? Who doesn't jaywalk, who doesn't curse, who doesn't smoke, who doesn't drink, who doesn't look at women with lust in his heart, right? That's a good Christian. And if you do those things, you either lose your salvation or you are treated as so by those who think you have. When you don't understand what sexual immorality is, you don't understand what food sacrificed to idols is, you don't understand what strangling is, you don't understand what blood is about. Oh, I just have to keep those four things. Yeah, okay. Keep telling yourself that. Read verse 15 of that, or read verse 21 of that chapter 15 of Acts. For from ancient times, Moses is preached in the synagogues. In other words, it's sufficient that they avoid these things because why? It's going to lead to human exploitation. And then they can keep the rest of Torah. And then they can honor the rest of Torah. Now, this is the part where it gets hairy. You believe that if you jump through hoops of essentials, You somehow have secured your position in heaven. And yet my Bible says there's not that. You do not go to heaven. In fact, there's only certain people who are in heaven. And now I'm going to take it a step further. And I'm going to say that furthermore, you believe that somehow your behavior affects that aspect. When truth be told, the intensification of all power in the universe is a shepherd. And when he sees his sheep being eaten by a wolf, he goes and he removes the capability of that wolf to ever be able to do it again. In fact, an idiom for it is the breaking of teeth. In other words, if you knock the teeth out of a dog's mouth, it can never bite. Right? You get it? Okay. So now, in that whole thing, you have this ego belief that you are now special. And so you walk around this earth thinking that you have some special thing more than some other person, and you're going to go and tell them that you actually have this special thing more than them. And you call it evangelism. But truth be told, is it has nothing to do with that. There are people who have spent their entire lives dedicating their lives to quote unquote leading people to Jesus and quoting Romans chapter 10, verse 13, which is actually Joel chapter 2, verse 32. And when you grasp that the Yahweh that was in Yeshua is the Father, which is the higher self, which is something that you need to have an intuition towards because it is Yahweh emanating into you in this corrupt realm as the only light, the light of the world, you will understand that when you listen to the Father, which is the higher you, not something out here, not some separate mechanism or entity or power, but you, now you will grasp Romans chapter 8. And now you will grasp that it is your throne and that it is your name that is above every name. Yeah, you're not ready for that one. You're not ready to hear that that's the level that he wants to exalt you to, but you have a serious dysfunction. You believe you are evil to start with. You believe that you can't do anything good. You believe that you need somebody else to guide you to God. You believe you need someone else to show you how to read the Bible. You believe that you actually have an inferiority to God. That's your mistake. But now I want you to think about friends, okay? Let's talk about friends, let's talk about teachers, and let's talk about students. Do you know that a rabbi cannot go into a restroom at the synagogue? He has to go somewhere else. And he might not even get away with it there. Because if it's close enough to shul, it's possible that it still might be an issue. Why? Because it's very possible that a rabbi might sit down on the toilet and there'll be another rabbi in the other stall and they start the midrash and the deepest wisdom that could ever be known was there. And so the students follow him into the restroom. He has to close the door and lock it before they can come through. You say, why does somebody throw themselves at the feet of a man like that? I will tell you why. Because a student has placed themselves under the covering of their rabbi. And what that means is that every single last thing their rabbi does, they are supposed to do. Okay? Now, let's talk a minute about a rabbi. A rabbi knows he knows nothing. And knows that he's got a bunch of idiots following him around, trying to say that he knows something. And so his job is to act like he knows something. And here's the beauty of it. something actually comes from that. But the truth is that a rabbi is humble enough to believe that he actually is ignorant. Why? Because of the word rabbi itself. What does rabbi mean? One who increases in knowledge. A rabbi comes from the root word ravav, or the root word rabbah. Ravav means to increase, to add to perpetually. That's what rabbi means, to add to perpetually. That's why we have rabbis who die in their 90s and have this lifetime of wisdom, because they have dedicated themselves to a system of knowledge. But here's the crazy part, is as they practice their lifestyles, their students adapt to the lifestyle. Now, here's the crazy part about it. Students are servants of the rabbi. The rabbi should not have to cultivate his garden. The rabbi should not have to cook. The rabbi should not have to do the things, because part of the system of rabbinical teaching is actually to serve the rabbi, to pay him back for the knowledge he is giving, right? That part right there is why Yeshua said servants. But what does he say during the Passover before he dies? No longer do I call you students, but I call you friends. When a Talmid is no longer a student, but a contemporary with that rabbi no longer looks at him as somebody he has authority over, but instead will sit in his seat, not at his feet. And as a friend, he will midrash with him equally, bringing the fire, accusing him of deceit, of lying, and of whatever. You've never seen a true midrash until you see rabbis say, you create an absolute abomination of Torah by that statement. Because why? Because they have this intensity, this passion about what? Torah. The thing you find abominable. The thing you just can't get your mind wrapped around, because you've got to have that sodium nitrate infused pork belly. In the ideal of a rabbi, in the ideal of a friend, a rabbi to a rabbi, do you have subjection? Do you have authority? No. You have equality. No longer do I call you servants, but I call you friends. And therefore, guess what? That means you are seated on the throne of the intensification of all power in the universe, but not in your ego. And here's the part that's so very, very important. A rabbi is always training his replacements. You will sit in the seat of your rabbi. Do you get that? That you will sit in the seat of Yeshua, who does not find it robbery to be equal with God, whose name is above all names. I don't think it's quite sunk in yet what I'm saying, but I want you to think about friends that you have. You may have some superior knowledge to them. Perhaps maybe your friend is not savvy with the internet, but you are. But perhaps they can sew a button so much better than you. Does that make them superior to you or you to them? No. That is what we give to each other as what? Equals. But you see, she doesn't want to be equal because she doesn't want it for free, which is what your ego is doing, which is why I told you to go in the mirror and tell yourself that you're stupid. Because if you think that there's some essentials that you need to jump through, which consequently was a seat that was obfuscated by a pagan king and then materialized a doctrine and a religion through a manipulation of bishops creates a quote unquote creed that then is the requirement by which you are to identify that you are what? Equal with God? My tuchus. I will tell you this. It is your ego that thinks that you're saved, not you. Why? Because you still put God out there and you still don't think you're an Elohim. It is your ego that seats you in the pew hoping to get a nugget from God. When the truth is that the nugget is you. The gift to this world. Let's see how this goes. The wages of sin is death, but the free gift of God is eternal life through Christ Jesus our Lord. Is that the only gift? The wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is you and your specialness to this world in your higher self. It is an ego trip to think you are saved. That there's some demonic, evil infested realm by which if you don't accept Christ, you go to and suffer for eternity because you were born evil, is to keep you doing exactly what you're doing, which is being subject. You see, part of the revolution that needs to happen is Christianity as we know it needs to die. And what needs to be resurrected in its place is the true faith and religion of Yeshua HaMashiach, which consequently doesn't keep Christmas and Easter, but furthermore does not sit and accept the doctrine of tyrants. We never have. As Americans, we put the word tyrants in our Declaration of Independence, and that we would throw off such a government. And yet, you sit on the pew on Sunday morning, a day created by the liars. And you sit in a pew, a position created by the liars. You think you're evil, a doctrine created by the liars who want you to be in control and not more powerful than them because their ego is stuck on the money and on the indulgence and on the power of their position. And if you think I'm wrong, look at the 95 Thesis, where Luther declared that power and corruption. And then himself, unfortunately, fell into the same judgment and did not overcome that temptation. But what is absolutely imperative for you to know is that you are not insignificant. You are not less than. You are not supposed to be subject to in the sense of what they've taught you. Is there an intuition? Absolutely. That intuition just brought you this message. But what you need to know is it is Yahweh Elohim giving you the message because I am willing to listen to that intuition. I didn't know how this message was going to go, and I didn't know how long it was going to go, and I didn't know what I was going to put in it. Because that's not how this works. And if you can apply that to the rest of your operation, which can be really scary, really uncomfortable, and can definitely cause your ego to go, wait a minute, what about this? This is so expensive and risky. And what if God doesn't even exist? What if I can't trust him? What if this promise never actually comes? Oh, well, instead, I'm going to build a golden calf. I got this covered. I don't have to worry anymore about what if. I got it. I got it. I'm in control. You see, our biggest failure as humanity is that we actually lie to ourselves first. We convince ourselves that something is okay when it's not. We convince ourselves that something's true when it's not. We convince ourselves that something's logical when it's not. We convince ourselves that something is God when it's not. We convince ourselves that we've heard from God when we haven't. Do you know the consequences of that? What does Torah say? That prophet shall die. You don't understand the gravity of how you lie to yourself. And one of the biggest lies you've been telling yourself is that you're saved, that you're going to heaven. Or worse yet, that one of your loved ones who has died has gone to heaven. Or worse yet, one of the people who you don't like has gone to hell. What a shock to the system it would be if you found people in heaven who you thought went to hell. You'd throw a fit like Jonah did. But what you don't understand is that the truth is that salvation is about what you need to be delivered from. And that's it. And I promise you, it's not hell. It's not your sinful nature, your evil. It's your wounds. And what is the deliverance? It is Yeshua violently destroying that lie. The person who harmed you decided that you were not worthy of protection, not worthy of dignity, not worthy of safety. And so guess what? You actually believe it. And now you're going to apply God to that? Do something with your miserable life. Because I'm going to tell you right now, what you're doing to the rest of the world with this salvation business and this creed business and this hogwash is destroying it with your judgments and your fundamentalism and all of the other things where you say, oh, they're not doing it the right way, therefore they must be condemned. They're cursed. Let me tell you something. You have never been more cursed in your life than when you make that judgment. Because truth be told, you look at the most heinous crime in the world, you think of the most worst thing that you could possibly think of and try to decide the fate of that one. You have to fall under the same judgment and overcome the temptation. You will be tempted. And I'm going to tell you right now, where you say, oh, no, I can never be tempted. I know your secrets. I know your secrets because the mistake I made is I looked in the abyss and I saw and found out, you know what? I have had politicians. I have had pastors. I've had people confess things to me that you would never believe that they thought of and were tempted with and actually did. And I have failed miserably in my own overcoming of temptations, but I can tell you that I understand that he made him who knew no sin become sin for us, and we might become the righteousness of God, and that I have never merited that. Your imputation of what we would call salvation, which consequently, like I said, soterology is actually a third-year theology student. So you don't even get it in the first couple of years. And so those of you that got an associate probably never touched it. But the depth of the study of salvation will blow your mind. But it's all hogwash. It's all based upon a false doctrine from the 1300s, a false doctrine from the 600s, and a false doctrine from the 300s. All based upon not wanting to be like Jews. All based upon not wanting to keep the feast days of God and eat your sodium nitrate infused pork belly. When it comes down to it, I will tell you what I hear from every Christian. I want to eat my bacon. Fine. Eat your bacon. Stay a sheeple, a pew sitter. Continue to be a part of the dominant culture of your time. Continue to fail to be pastoral, to fail to be a shepherd, to fail to guide the people of the world who are the people of God. You see, you made the mistake when you thought that because when Yeshua died, you made the mistake of thinking that somebody was excluded from that list. But he didn't get off the cross because of that secret sin that you still haven't confessed and probably need to go to prison for. He didn't get off the cross. He didn't get off the cross when you decided that you could drink and drive and you ran and you hit and ran somebody and nobody knows about it. He didn't get off the cross when you were beating your kid. He didn't get off the cross when you were secretly stealing money from your company. But Torah would like to rip you a new one for all the things you've done just in this year. Because Torah is designed to distribute justice equally. It's a mechanism. But it is also a soul. And it is a human. And that's why it says, who shall bring charge against God's elect? Who's the elect? Anyone who Christ died for. Right? If we start to try to pick and choose, that the first thing I'm going to ask is, how do you know? How do you know that it is you? How do you know you're the chosen? By what measure do we measure that? In fact, I would say that if there was a hell, if there was some way that humanity at large had somehow created a place like that through their ability to alter reality, that's who should be going there. He made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God. Is not merited. You cannot add to it. You cannot take away from it. And guess what that means? That means that your security and your faith should not be based upon somebody being able to say something offensively to it and you get mad. You should feel great about what you believe and walk in what you believe. I fearlessly step into the false doctrines of Christianity, the sacred stuff, the stuff that Christians are terrified of me speaking. Like when I shake my fist and say that I will not serve a God who creates an eternal damnation, an eternal conscious punishment. I will not. You can kill me and put me there, but I still won't. Because he created me to have that zeal for what? For the truth about who he is. Yahweh. Rahum. Yahweh, compassionate. That's the first thing he declares to Moses when he brings him into the cleft of the rock. That's what Yeshua was trying to tell you. Greater love hath no man than this, than that he lay down his life for his friend, his contemporary. To what? Give him equality. So humanity at large sits as a potential to be equal with God. Get over it. Now you understand why I said I don't want to necessarily give this whole message. I ended up doing it anyways, but do you get that? You need to stop thinking that you somehow are in a special position from everyone else. That is a false doctrine designed to make you subject to the powers that be, who interpreted your Bible for you, who got rid of the original manuscripts because they were Hebrew, who kept the manuscripts that indicate that you are a Gentile and that's okay, who taught you to believe that you do not have to keep or honor the very will of God, Torah, who is actually a person, who consequently came here as a person. The essence of the teaching and instruction of God that comes from a heart of a father willing to teach his children the right path. So what's the end point? Releasing my zeal and stepping into the realm of building you. Stop thinking that you're the one who's accomplishing this. That's the golden calf. Start bringing the ego down and you will elevate the intuition. And the intuition is going to tell you that you are him and that you are equal with him. And you're just going to have to get over the fact that there is a split there on the when and the place, but not the who and the how, and not the what and the why. When you grasp that that is all one thing that you are part of, as an emanation of an eternal, intensifying being, then you will understand your value. You will understand your relationship. You've got to grasp that your relationship with God is screwed up right now because you were taught what you were taught, not because of what's going on in your life, not because of the latest person who has injured you, but instead because of what you believe about yourself is what you are doing. Stop being a follower and become a leader and begin to activate that which is already inside of you. Stop making it external. Stop blaming some malevolent entity for your bad behavior and your secret sins. And start identifying with the truth of who you are. Stop. Okay, see the game. Stop playing and identify yourself as who you are. Because you are not some insignificant player, but you are the master of the game. You're the designer. You're the keeper. Shabbat shalom.